Lisa. Good morning, everyone. Hello, Florida. This is Ruth Buchanan with FloridaMakes, giving you another edition of our webinar series. Today's topic is so important, so timely, and relevant to Florida's manufacturers. Good morning, Dawn. Thank you. And we welcome you for part 2 of the Cybersecurity Fundamentals for Florida Manufacturers. Thank you for committing your time. Today, we ask for 90 minutes of your time because there is a lot of content to cover, and we are so honored and thrilled to have our partners from Cyber Florida join us today. My role here is to introduce the webinar today, and then my partner, colleague, coworker, Jolie, will be facilitating the major portion of the webinar and do some introductions as well. So so Cybersecurity Fundamentals for Florida Manufacturers, part 2. Those of you new to this, you will be getting the video link later after the webinar, so you can reference and share. And there's some closing pieces at the end, but let's go ahead and get started. Go ahead and put on the next slide. Oh, that's me. Hi. Okay, next slide, Connor. Yeah, so FloridaMakes, we are your state manufacturing extension partnership. We are here to help improve the productivity and technological performance of Florida's manufacturing sector. We are the recognized leader for strengthening and advancing Florida's manufacturing economy. Next slide, please. I love this one, my favorite one. This is because, you know, the words I just gave you, what is that? So this is kind of like puts it in a bulleted format, some of the things or the big buckets that we do. This is how we help our manufacturers. We help with the technology acceleration and innovation. Today's topic is cybersecurity. That is very important. We did one on intellectual property in November. By the way, those of you that didn't know, the video from the intellectual property webinar is in our YouTube channel. Yes, we're on YouTube now, by the way. Oh, yes, we have our own channel on YouTube. Go ahead and start improving your knowledge of some of the things that we do. Supply chain optimization is very important. Fourth is the bread and butter business advisors. They go and help our manufacturers to go look at the shop floor and do the assessment and make sure that our manufacturers are doing their continuous improvement. We have a session on workforce training and development again coming up, so stay tuned for that one. And the last one is, I guess, where I come from, my favorite one is business growth and financial services. So those are the 6 buckets that we do to help our manufacturers grow in the state of Florida. And the next slide is on key takeaways. And I think at this point, right, Jolie, we're going to have you talk about the key takeaways for this session, and then she'll go ahead and co-host this at this point. Jolie is our in-house cybersecurity expert, very knowledgeable, not just on cybersecurity and CMMC. I work closely with her, ensuring that our manufacturers in the Northwest Florida region in Jacksonville, she covers the whole territory, 2 time zones, I tell people, 2 time zones and 5-hour driving, 1.1 to the other point. But happy to have Jolie co-host this with me this morning for a wonderful session with all of you. Welcome again, and Jolie, go ahead and take over. Thank you.
Thank you, Ruth. Happy to be here with everyone. What an important topic for all of our manufacturers, not just our defense industrial base, but hugely important. The key takeaways here are the review of the key concepts of cybersecurity. Many of you have heard CMMC level 1, level 2, level 3, the industrial base, the whole bit. So we're going to cover that. Andy does a great job with that, frankly. We're also going to resume the learning for the roadmap and starting a cybersecurity practice, digging into what are those milestones a little bit, how does that all work, and what do you need to do to protect yourself and be ready for those government contracts and the work that you do out there. We will overview those key steps of achieving CMMC compliance for defense suppliers. I know Andy's going to cover some of the ways Cyber Florida partners with us there in the, the environment. And then he's also going to cover some of those no-cost resources, as I mentioned, that partnership with Cyber Florida and the critical risk assessment that is out there that everyone can use. I'm so super excited about that piece. Next slide, I think. Oh, that's me. We can shut that off now. I'll introduce Andy, which is the most important part. Andy comes to us through Cyber Florida. He's an experienced educator, leader, manager, entrepreneur, has a great sense of humor. I don't always see that with my cybersecurity specialist, so I'm always excited to say that. Over 30 years of progressive experience and accomplishment in the government, defense, commercial, and academic sectors. And he's out there building these things, maintaining complex systems. He's not just theoretical, he's out there hands-on, doing what needs to happen inside of industry. So I'm super excited about that. And I'm reminding everyone, just a little housekeeping, put your questions in the chat so we can capture that. And when we get to the Q&A section, we'll be sharing all of those questions with everyone and answering those as best as we can. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to Andy so he can take care of his share and we can get things started. Thanks for everyone being here.
Julie, thanks so much. And I'll go ahead and take over the screen. And welcome to the talk. I'd like to first thank you all for taking time out of your morning to spend it with FloridaMakes, with Cyber Florida, and most importantly, with me. I take note that Jolie pointed out that usually cybersecurity people are pretty boring, but occasionally I might work hard to make you crack up just a little bit. We'll see how it goes today. So, I don't have any promises that this will be fun or funny. In fact, it's guaranteed to be a little bit boring, but we'll do our best. First, I'd like to call attention to my friend and colleague from Cyber Florida, Brian Langley, who is on this call with us. He's the lead program manager for the Critical Infrastructure Protection Program at Cyber Florida. He is your point of contact for Cyber Florida resources and activities as follow-ons from this. So if ever I say on here, Cyber Florida does these things, I'm really just writing a check on Brian's account. And of course, I'm Andy Seeley. I'm your friendly commentator for today. My email address is here. I welcome hearing from you directly, and I welcome connecting with you on LinkedIn and any other sorts of things I can do for you. Today, we're going to first talk a little bit about Cyber Florida and what's offered to you. Then we're going to dig into the cybersecurity aspects for manufacturers in Florida. Although I do want to temper a little bit what we're talking about. As Jolie said, this is for all manufacturers, not just in defense, but we're going to come at this from a defense perspective. So if you have a specific question or comment or want to guide the conversation in a direction that is not defense, put it in the chat and I'll do my absolute best to address your interest. So as we just said, we'll review these things, and I'm going to start after talking about Cyber Florida, looking at what we talked about in the last webinar, where we covered fear, uncertainty, and doubt, and our response to that. We talked about controlled unclassified information. We talked about the National Institute for Standards and Technology, NIST special publication 800-171, and of course, the topic of the day, which is cybersecurity maturity model certification. We're going to answer some questions that were raised during and after the last presentation and raised as a feature of your registration for this one. So if you posed a question, I do my level best to answer it in this presentation. And if I don't, put it in the chat and we'll talk about it at the end. We're going to look, put a microscope on contract language. We're going to talk again about CUI scoping and CUI definitions. I'm going to recover the CUI definitions thing that I've talked about in the past with this group and have an opportunity to kind of re-look at it, put a second coat of paint on it for that. And I'm also going to give you my personal opinions about CMMC costs for preparation, achieving certification, and sustainment. Anybody who tells you this is the actual answer to the cost question is probably making it up. because everybody's making it up. It's my personal opinion. It's not Cyber Florida's opinion when we get to that. And I'm going to give you a very, very high level starting point for how to build a CMMC roadmap. But starting with Cyber Florida. So if you're not familiar with Cyber Florida, I'm going to tell you a little bit about this. This is a Florida state legislature created activity. It's run and executed out of the University of South Florida. Go Bulls. And it's been around for about 10, going on 11 years. This is part of the Florida statutes. This is actually the law of the land for Florida. And there's these 5, I'm having to count them. No, 6. There's 6 specific goals set out in Florida statute 1004.444 that are relevant and something worth knowing for any company working in the state of Florida. Our goals in the statutes are to set Florida out as the leader in the nation. Look, it's not a competition between us and Georgia and Alabama and Mississippi and so on, but it kind of is too. We'd like to be first if there's an option. We have a goal in the missions to create jobs in the cybersecurity industry and to enhance the cybersecurity workforce, because the cybersecurity workforce in the cybersecurity industry, who do they work for? They work for you, not for the cybersecurity companies. And we want to create a culture of sharing cybersecurity knowledge and resources and training. We're seeking out opportunities for research and development, and we're attracting companies and jobs to the state, specifically with respect to cybersecurity. And we're hoping and helping and pushing to create new technologies that have applications for you in the cybersecurity domain. We offer, through Cyber Florida, we offer certain workshops and resources for you, such as this CMMC update is a deep dive. It might not be the deepest dive, but it's a pretty deep dive into CMMC for how it works and what you need to know. We have a great workshop that's called Network Noise. It's like a tabletop exercise where we go through a scenario of your organization melting down in the face of a cybersecurity attack. It's kind of fun. It's a little bit stressful for the people that are going through the exercise in a fun way. We have reports, studies, templates that are available on cyberflorida.org. And if you want something that you don't see on the website, or that you talk to Brian and see if it's possible. There's a certain amount of funding available, and there's a mission in place to serve this constituency of customers. So if there's something you need, ask Brian. Maybe he can do it for you. One of the key things we do in Cyber Florida is the Critical Infrastructure Protection Program. This consists of some reports and studies and templates, but it's also a cybersecurity risk assessment, and it's free to you to be able to use. It's at no cost. You know, when you're working in the government and government contracting, whenever you hear the word free, if you've been doing it for a while, you're probably like me and you flinch a little bit, because nothing free is good. No cost is good, but free is not good, because it implies there's something potentially contractually inappropriate there. So at no cost, we provide this as a service to Florida companies. These self-assessments, they don't solve your problems. They're the first step towards understanding what problems you have. And this is one of the free resources we have. We're also building this program. So we've got some things in development over the course of this and the coming years that are expanding the reach and the value to you. When you go to the self-assessment, this evaluation tool, this is actually developed out of Idaho National Labs. So it comes out of the Department of Energy, and they are funded to build this and share it with others. And we have a tailored version of this. So you create an account with our CSET tool, and then you're able to log into it and follow the flow of the account of the tool that asks you questions and digs in and interrogates you on what are your practices and what are your policies. We have 2 different levels of this. One is the light version that is only 20 questions, and you can get through it fairly quickly and get an early baseline. The longer one is much more detailed, 154 different things that it interrogates about your environment from a cybersecurity perspective. When you're done, the assessment it gives you a great starting point for what to do next. So if you haven't done anything cybersecurity wise, this is a thing that doesn't cost you any money out of your company's pocket, although it does take time. And it will take time to do this. This is not something you just decide to do before lunch today. Now, I'm going to quickly go over some of the things we reviewed in the last presentation, because I know we have a few people who weren't here with us. And when you see this, if you're like, hey, that's something I want to go dig in deeper on, you can ask Ruth and Jolie, and they can give you access to what we did previously. First thing we did is we covered fear, uncertainty, and doubt, the FUD. And it was pretty fun because I really enjoyed putting a list of about 100 cybersecurity acronyms on the screen and then asking you rhetorically, how many of these do you know? Because in the cybersecurity world, to effectively protect your company's resources, you have to know these things. And that's part of the fear is I don't know them. And I don't have the time to know them. It's not my company's job to know them. So working through, how do we get through that? And I proposed a little bit of a lighthearted framework of examine, transform, and command. Go from FUD to etc., where you examine your business and you baseline what you have and what you are and what your goals are. And then you transform how you do business by adopting a framework and gathering your resources and creating this culture of cybersecurity. And then you take command and you drive towards your goals with short and long-term roadmaps. That was what we covered in the first webinar. Then we got into cybersecurity maturity model certification. Level 1 is a self-assessment that's kind of like the CSET tool, which is short and long. Level 1 is kind of like that. It's a short thing. And it's a self-assessment that is only focused on FCI, which is federal contract information. And then level 2 is a mandatory third-party assessment that is much, much more detailed and is focused on how a contracting company handles controlled unclassified information, CUI. And then level 3 is an advanced assessment requirement that is, I'm pretty confident is out of scope for anybody attending this webinar. It's a very limited number of companies that are expected to be held accountable to level 3. And also, it is my understanding that the government is not intending to start enforcing level 3 just yet. They're trying to get level 1 and 2 up and running. And before I move from this, I realized I neglected to say when I was talking about the Cyber Florida CSET. CSET is based on the NIST Cybersecurity Framework 2.0 framework. It is not based on CMMC. There's a lot of overlap. There's a lot of synergies between the two things. But the CSET by itself is not a CMMC tool, but it is an excellent tool if you haven't done anything yet. If you already are in good shape with a cybersecurity framework for your company, just start with talking about CMMC. But if you're just getting started, start with the CSET from Cyber Florida. It's a great value. The last summary that I'll have from the first webinar is that CMMC is mandatory, and it's a verified implementation of these security controls that are outlined in NIST special publication 800-171 Rev 2. And I'm going to foot stomp Rev 2 because when you go to the NIST special publication website, you'll see Rev 3 is current and Rev 2 says this document is deprecated and no longer current. But the Department of Defense settled on Rev 2. Don't argue about it because Rev 3 includes a lot of additional controls for privacy, and it adds probably 30 or 40% more work to do. So be happy it's not Rev 3. CMMC is going to be required in contracts, and I'm going to talk a lot about contract language here. DFARS 252.204-7021. If you have a 7021 DFARS clause in a contract today, this is now your problem. This 800-171 R2 compliance, by the way, has always been required via self-reporting because DFARS 7012 clause has been around for a decade, and it has always required that you do this just with self-reporting. Now, that self-reporting has been the problem There's the joke running around the industry that CMMC is our punishment because the DIBS self-reporting was inconsistent and not done very well. So that's the summary from what we talked about last time. Now, between then and now, you've asked a bunch of questions. So I want to address those questions first and make sure that we're actually giving you the information you need. So first, the question was raised, is CMMC going to be a standard for all government contractors, not just defense? And the answer is no, but it's also yes. It's just a matter of when. Right now, Department of Defense is the only department in the federal government that is requiring this through federal statute. But I find hints as I research what's happening in the CMMC world. I find hints all over the place. The Department of Energy, for example, their current cybersecurity framework is C2M2. I think it's pretty funny because CMMC and C2M2, they're actually the exact same words, just in a different order. But apparently the Department of Energy is talking about migrating C2M2 into CMMC in the next couple of years. It's not a validated fact. It's something that I've seen mentioned in different scenarios. I've also seen in 2027 and beyond, there are other agencies like Homeland Security, like NASA, EPA, other agencies like this that are looking a little bit over the horizon. They're waiting for CMMC to settle and mature in defense, and then they're going to adopt it. So why are they going to do that? Why is the whole of federal government going to end up following CMMC? Because it's pretty good from the government's perspective. It's worthwhile and it's necessary. It doesn't mean it's good for us on the contract side, but it's worthwhile and it's necessary for the government. A lot of folks in our last meeting were concerned about subcontractor flow down from contracts. I'm a sub and my prime has a 7021 clause, or I'm a prime and does my sub need to comply just like I do? Couple different ways to slice this up. In the federal code, Title 48, Chapter 2, Subchapter A, Part 204.75, I warned you this would be boring. In the federal code, it doesn't even mention subcontracting. But it does have this really important little tidbit baked in there. Up until September of this year, they're not going to be rolling out the CMMC clauses without OUSD ANS approval, which I think is interesting. A lot of the pieces of the government, from what I'm seeing, are not talking well with each other. So this says you're not going to see a 7021 CMMC requirement in your new contracts this year until September, unless there's an exception for that. This OUSD is working on, Office of the Undersecretary of Defense. So what does that mean for you? Does that mean you're not going to see it? Or does that mean that your contracting officer can include this language in your contracts without that approval? I think there's a little bit of wiggle room there, and you might see it even though it says that. But when you look at DFARS, and you look at the actual language for 252.204-7021, it says pretty gosh darn clearly, yes, you shall. Insert, and this is guidance to the contracting officer, insert the substance of the clause, including this paragraph, in all subcontracts and other contract instruments, including subcontracts for the acquisition of commercial products or services, excluding COTS. So if it's a COTS product, then it should be out of scope for CMMC. But that's a pretty specific statement. And yet, there was a briefing done by the Department of Defense Chief Information Officer, which owns the CMMC program implementation. DoD CIO in their briefing said the prime flows requirements to a subcontract based on the data shared. So on the screen here, the answer to this question in order is no, yes, and maybe. That's not really crispy of a crisp answer for you, but it's the real answer. What we're also seeing is a lot of large primes, at least in the services world for defense contracting, they're mandating CMMC compliance now in their subcontracts, even without a prime contract clause from the government. And that's within their rights to do, as they're writing you as a sub. The prime writes you a subcontract. They can put whatever they want in it, and you agree to it or you don't. So you're going to be beholden to this anyway, regardless. So when you look at this and say, well, there's a maybe in there, I wouldn't even get distracted by that. I'm only putting it here so that you've seen, yes, there are no's and there are maybes, but there's definitely yeses. Treat it all like it's yes, unless there's a reason not to. And that reason is a conversation with your contracting officers. Next question, what about CMMC and ITAR, which is the International Trafficking in Arms Regulation? Well, they're different programs. CMMC is about controlled unclassified information, how it's transmitted, processed, stored, and disposed. CMMC is managed by defense. ITAR is about how the sales of sensitive technologies are shared with non-US nation purchasers. ITAR is managed by state, not defense. So they're different programs with different requirements. Now, there's going to be some overlap in data protection requirements, but if you have ITAR compliance, that doesn't give you really anything for CMMC compliance and vice versa. You have to manage to both programs. Now, that relationship may mature, or it may change, it may become easier over time, but at the current moment, if you're a manufacturer creating things that are controlled by ITAR, you've got an ITAR requirement. And if you are answering contracts from the Defense Department that require CMMC, you have a CMMC requirement. And those two things are two different things. Do you need CMMC for your operational technology, for your industrial Internet of Things technologies, for your CNC machines, and all these sorts of things that are not traditional computing? Now, I'm not a manufacturing person by background and trade. So when I talk about this, I'm talking about this purely from a cybersecurity policy perspective. But why wouldn't you? Is my answer. Why wouldn't you need these things? Because CMMC is about how controlled unclassified information is transmitted, processed, stored, and disposed. But it's also about telling the story about how you do those things. And the storytelling matters. And really, the first big lift you're going to do if you're getting started on your journey here is about scoping. So is your operational technology in your scope for CUI? If the OT equipment does not touch the CUI data, it does not have to process it or store it, then it's out of your scope, but you have to clearly define that and clearly articulate it. If it's in your scope and it doesn't have this inherent capacity or capability to do whatever the CMMC required controls for security are, you have to tell a story around that. And like, I'm thinking about authentication controls. Like, you have to have password rules for complexity and expiration. But what if your CNC equipment is connected to the network but doesn't take a password? Does that mean that you will never be able to achieve CMMC compliance? And I think, now this is we're in opinion zone here, Andy's personal opinion. I think it's a C3PAO conversation. We'll talk about C3PAOs here shortly. It's a conversation with your assessor about what they're willing to accept. And it's a storytelling that you say, if I have a piece of equipment that's like that, how am I going to protect it to meet the intent and the spirit of CMMC? I'm going to wrap it with something else. I'm going to have it isolated in a facility where I limit access that complies with those rules. I'm going to have some defensive boundary around it that meets the requirement in a complete way, such that nobody can gain access to that piece of equipment that processes CUI without having to pass through the compliant controls. You've got to tell the story, but it is not a plan of action and milestones. You can't say, I have a plan to fix this later, because CMMC explicitly, for level 2, explicitly denies POAM for compliance. So those are the questions you had asked. And hopefully I was able to answer them in such a way that it gives you some clarity on that. but I'm also confident that by answering those questions, I generated 2 or 3 more for each one of the answers. But now let's look at contract language, because really, CMMC, if you ask a cybersecurity person, they'll tell you, oh, that's a cybersecurity thing, but it's really a contract thing as well, because if the contract doesn't require it, then why would you do it? So first, the actual law of the land. So you in CMMC world, you'll hear people talk about CFR 32, which is the federal regulation. This is where the actual code of the laws of the United States are written. And in CFR 32, it is not the XX is in the address of this chapter XX. It's not like wait to fill in the numbers because we don't know them. It's actually XX because it started as A, then B, then C, then A, double A and double AB and all that. That's how many chapters there are here. There's XX chapters. It standardizes the way the executive branch handles information that requires protection. So when you go to look at CFR 32, this is the details on how to do CMMC. It's part of the law. But it doesn't say thou shalt. It just says, here's how. It's CFR 48 that says thou shalt. This is now part of the federal acquisition regulation. This is how the FAR gets the language to implement this. And CFR 32 took effect about 4 months ago, 5 months ago. CFR 48 took effect 2 months ago. That's why when you hear people say CMMC is live, well, it is live. And it's live because Title 48 became law just a couple months ago. Now this enables contracting officers to include contract language that requires CMMC. DFARS 252.204-7012. If you've been reading closely your defense contracts, you've been seeing this all along. And by the way, if you're a federal contractor, but not a defense contractor, just a quick aside, the FAR, you're probably familiar with the Federal Acquisition Regulation. DFARS is the Defense Federal Acquisition Regulation supplement that applies specifically to defense contracts. And this 7012 clause has been here for a decade. This specifies thou shalt follow NIST Special Publication 800-171, including building an SSP, a system security plan, and having an incident response plan, along with other requirements. But we'll take your word for it. And if you didn't do the whole thing, that's okay. You can have a plan of action and milestones. Just self-report to us that you're compliant and what you're not compliant with your POAM, and we'll be good. This was what I was joking about, is that CMMC is the punishment we have for not doing that very well. But this clause has always been in your contracts and will probably remain in your contracts, to be honest. 7019 in the DFARS talks about how self-assessments are done. It pairs nicely with 7012. If you have a 7012 clause that requires self-assessments and reporting, you're going to have the 7019 clause that tells you this is what we expect out of your self-reporting, which then just points you back to another clause about the basic and medium and high assessment levels. But here's where 7021 starts rolling out. This is the CMMC requirement that's brand new just a couple months ago. And I consider this to be 7012 plus 7019 plus we're going to make sure you did it right because we're going to enforce it. So this is the enforcement. You'll see this language. And if you don't see this language in an actual contract, then you're not being beholden to it. I want to pause on that for just a moment. I'm not a lawyer. I'm not a contracts lawyer, but I've read a lot of contracts and I've read a lot of requests for proposals and requests for quotes and things like that. If you're looking in your contract language, it tells you what you're contractually obligated for. If you're being told verbally that you have to do CMMC, but you're given a contract that doesn't have this clause, you've got some exploration to do on what's actually contractually binding you, because this is the binding. One of the questions that was asked previously that I did not answer in the beginning because I wanted to answer it here is about cloud. Well, I use a cloud service provider. What does that mean? Well, let me also address this is not just a cloud service provider, but a managed service provider. There's some implications for a managed service provider, regardless if it's an on-premise solution for that MSP or if it's in the cloud. The 7012 clause specifically calls this out, and they say that cloud service provider, in order to be used for a defense company that is following 800-171 and the CMMC practice, it has to have a FedRAMP moderate equivalency. It does not have to have FedRAMP moderate certification, but it has to meet the equivalency. And there's a memo from the Defense Department that I've got linked here that details what that means and how to achieve it. So it's not quite as hard for the cloud service provider, because achieving FedRAMP certification for them is super hard and very expensive. Haven't gone and been independently assessed. So this is the path. You're likely to find CSPs, cloud service providers, that are FedRAMP moderate equivalent. You're likely to find more of those than are FedRAMP certified. And it goes deeper in CFR 32. So when you go dig into the actual CMMC rule, the guidance, they give you this nice little chart that tells you. So in here, the acronym CUI, ESP, external service provider. And then SPD is security protection data, which is a subclass of CUI. So if you're processing CUI and you're using a CSP, that CSP will meet the FedRAMP moderate equivalent requirements that I just showed you on the previous page. If that CSP is only processing security protection data, think about that as you're generating logs from your systems in your environment, and those logs are being processed in the cloud. That's SPD, that's security protection data. Then you only need to consider the CSP's services or your MSP's services as being in your assessment scope. So you're assessing their practices, not their environment itself. So it's a lot less work on you, but it still expands your scope, but it's a lot less work than having to go convince your service provider to go through all this themselves. These are some snippets from some contracts that I worked on in the last couple of years. So they're not super new, but they're not that old. But this is an example of what you see when your contracts are asking you for these types of things. So on the left, you've got, and these are FedSIM task orders, is what I was working on. You've got explicitly calls out in section K, DFARS 252.204-7019. They're requiring us to do these self-assessments. On the right, you've got a subtask that is, this is just before CMMC, the CFR rules went into public comment. So they didn't use those terms yet, but they definitely call out clearly here that we're creating something that it has the capability to be certified for CUI processing. Why would they say that? Because this contract, which was awarded before the rule was final, is now prepared to execute on the rule when the contract is renewed. And then on the bottom, you can see 252.204-7012 is a contract clause requirement in section I of this contract. This is coming out of NIWC Atlantic. And you can see on the left, there's language specifically 252.204-7012. It says it. It says it on the right for enhanced security controls. It's kind of funny in this section 852 that you see on the bottom left, it calls out 800-171 Rev 1. Now, I don't know if this contract got amended after it was awarded to say Rev 2. That's kind of that's a copy paste miss on the acquisition shop for that. That's a mistake on their part. But on the bottom right, it says under GFI that the government will mark CUI if you've dealt with this at all in the last 6 months. You know that that's a little bit laughable. because the government is very, very inconsistent, not just in their marking, but in their understanding. So let's have a little bit of a look at that CUI and then the CMMC levels as well. If you attended the last session, you've already seen this before. I wanted to re-go over CUI definitions because it's an ongoing challenge for people to understand what this is. If you read the National Archives and their descriptions on this link here for the archives.gov, you're going to come away with a sense of every single thing I say and do is CUI. I can't get away from it. It's the air I'm breathing. And you wouldn't be necessarily wrong if you read it too broadly. This is where it comes back to talking to your government contracting officer, talking to your customer, and understanding what is it that they are considering to be sensitive and how are they planning to approach it. The chart that I blatantly plagiarized from archives.gov here on the right, the picture, shows how they consider CUI to be a subset of FCI. Well, what's really the difference? FCI is your contract information that is not inherently sensitive to the government other than the sensitivities that come from if it's exposed, then that puts the contractor at risk and it puts the defense industrial base at risk for having capacity. But CUI is information that puts the government's interests at risk. So it digs in a little bit deeper. NARA, the National Archives, they define these organizational indices on the left. Manufacturing is one of the 16 critical infrastructure segments that are defined by the Department of Homeland Security and the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Administration Agency, CISA. So you are right in here in this in the very beginning, but you're also working in defense. You're also working with export control in a lot of ways. You have intellectual property and patents. You're doing procurement and acquisition, and you have proprietary business information. So all of those that I have highlighted in green are your organizational indexes for what CUI matters to you and to your customers. But when you're dealing with defense, each of these breaks down into more detailed, specific things. Like in defense, there's a category called controlled technical information. And that very likely is going to be the CUI category that most impacts you, because as a manufacturer, the government's going to give you a requirement to create things, and that's going to be controlled technical information almost by definition when they give it. But they should mark it. And the marking guidance, there's some very loose hints at marking guidance in NARA. In the NIST publications, there's some suggestions that there is marking guidance, but the real place to find this is in Department of Defense Instruction 5200.48, which defines the handling of CUI for the Defense Department. And they say specifically that a paragraph marking is required and a document marking is required, and here's examples. So you go look at this, this documentation, you say, oh, well, this is perfectly simple. Now I know what this looks like, except that your contracting officers and your customers are not necessarily consistently following this guidance. And that's a challenge for you. If it was easy, we wouldn't be having this webinar. So, but I'm letting you know that this is a challenge and it requires a conversation and a relationship with your customer to understand what it is that they want to protect and how you want to protect, how you're going to protect it. There's 3 levels of CMMC, and they are not cumulative. So if you've been thinking, I'm going to achieve level 1 this year and level 2 next year, and then I'll get around to level 3 the third year, that's not the intent for this. Level 1 are the 17 requirements. It's a subset of 800-171-R2. 17 requirements that are self-assessed. There's rigor in the self-assessment, but it's a self-assessment to do to demonstrate your cybersecurity controls for that type of data. Level 2 is for CUI. It's 110 controls, every control out of 171 but it's also the 320 assessment objectives that are listed in 171A. So you've got a lot of work to do to achieve level 2 and a different cadence for maintaining that level. And then level 3 is also 800-172, which is advanced objectives. And that's just out of scope for our conversation today. There's a requirement for a system security plan for CMMC. If you have one of these and it's 20 pages long, you don't have one of these. This is likely to be a couple hundred pages. Why? Because your SSP is going to be your documentation and the evidence for how you comply with 110 controls and 320 objectives. So you're going to, for each one of those, demonstrate what it is you do to make sure that that is achieved. That's a lot of word space you need in order to accomplish that. You'll have additional supporting documents, incident response plan, for example, other policies in your company, training policies for how you inform your staff on cybersecurity hygiene, things like that. The SSP itself is considered CUI. This is part of your SPD category. There's a template for an SSP that NIST offers. You can get it from their website. And also they're not the only ones. There's other places where you can get templates and get started quickly kind of things. When you go looking, as I'm sure you have, searching in the internet for CMMC, there's a river of opportunities there and a lot of people that are ready to take your money, to be honest. A little bit of a microscope on the levels. So CMMC level 1, I've got linked here that you'll get when Ruth and Jolie share these slides with you, the direct links to the assessment and scoping guides for level 1. But level 1, these controls on the right, this is coming out of 800-171. These are the control families and the specific controls that you have to demonstrate your compliance with in order to achieve this. And level 2, of course, requires all controls that are listed there. Here's the links to those same 2 documents, but for the level 2. And this is the guidance that your certified third-party assessor is going to use as they assess you. Now, this little picture on the right here that I cheerfully lifted from the DoD CIO's website is just kind of a little bit of a visual of a scoping activity. And you can see the different color codes where it's color-coded. CUI is here, SPD is here, contractor risk managed assets, specialized assets, and things that are out of scope. So as you start identifying with a operational view and a network system view of your IT systems, including your network connected OT systems, you can then start kind of, let's color code them with a marker and say, this is where CUI flows and this is where it doesn't. And you can start creating a limited scope for your assessment. If you haven't been working with defense, but you're going to, you have to know about SPRS. If you already work with defense, then this should be something you already deal with. This is your system to report your compliance with cybersecurity rules. This is where your self-assessment reporting for the DFARS Clause 7012 has always gone. Now, this is going to be where your CMMC level 2 third-party assessments go, but you don't put it in here. The C3PAO does, the Certified Third-Party Assessment Organization. They put this in there via a tool called EMAS. EMAS is the risk management framework tool. It's the governance, risk, and compliance tool that the Department of Defense uses for defense systems. Your C3PAO completes your assessment, uploads the results into EMAS. EMAS automatically reports into SPRS, and then your contracting officer accesses SPRS to validate your ability to comply with security requirements for contract award. And there's some example language from an Alliant contract task order from last year. There's a phased rollout. So I already mentioned, showed you the language in the federal code about how 7021 contract language should not be used before September of this year unless OUSD approves it. And that may be variable in how that's complied with. But this is the intent right now. We're in phase one, this initial implementation. The effective rule date was just 2 months ago. And where applicable, solicitations will require these level 1 or level 2 assessments. See where it says self-assessment for level 2. I would not hone in on that and say, oh, I'm good. A level 2 self-assessment is going to be doled out very, very limited in its fashion to very specific companies. Phase 2 will be in the new year in 2026, and this is going to be level 2 certifications for many people. And then phase 3 is going to be the remainder of companies that haven't already contracts that haven't already included level 3. They're going to now. By phase 4, which is 3 years from now, every new contract is expected to have 7021 requirements in it. This is not just new contracts, but renewal contracts, option year contracts. Everything that is a new contract year is going to have this language, everything in 3 years. So let's talk about how to get there and what it's going to cost you. First thing to do is scoping. Scoping is really the most important thing you're going to do up front. You have to know what's CUI and what do you handle. How do you get it? How does it leave you? And it's not just your networks, it's also your physical domain. If somebody FedExes you a package that's full of CUI marked paper documents, you have to know what you're going to do about that. Where do you store things digitally and physically? How do you process them? And processing is on servers, it's on endpoints, it's on network devices, it's on printers. Who has access? And how do you control that access? It's not just good enough to say, well, these 3 people are my CUI people. If you have a printer and you're capable of printing CUI to that printer and it's in a common space, everybody that has access to the common space now has access to that. You have to be able to understand that level of granularity. And if you have physical or digital CUI, how do you take care of destroying that safely and effectively so that it can't be reconstituted? And if you have some sort of exfiltration or a spill or something, do you have a policy about that? Now, I'm joking that there's many jokers and some of them are wild. These are my estimates. And if you've seen other estimates and you think they're better, follow them. I'm not saying that I've got a lock on the absolute truth here, but just a way to start shaping this in if you haven't already. Just to get prepared for this. Your scoping activity, that might take you a week. It might take you 3 months. It depends on how well you've documented your inventory and how well you have been doing cybersecurity hygiene practices so far. You're going to have to review and document 110 controls and 320 objectives. If you're already following 800-171 R2, and because you've been following that from DFAR's 7012 clauses, this self-assessment is going to take a couple of weeks. But if you're not, and you haven't been doing anything at all, this is going to take a while, because not only are you documenting what you're doing right, but you're making a big long list of what you're not doing yet. If you're using a different framework than CMMC, you're going to find that there's parallels and there's things that are good but might need a little bit of tweaking. So that won't take so long. But if you're not following any cybersecurity at all, you're building the plane while you're flying it, and it's going to be a major lift for you, even a small company. You can hire a full-time employee for this. You're going to pay, depending, well, here in Florida, because we're in Florida, 90 to 110 as a starting salary would be my estimate to get somebody that's going to bring expertise to your company. You can hire a consultant. So an RP is a registered practitioner. I'll go over what that is in a few slides. You can hire an RP. I would expect you would pay a consulting rate 150 to 300 an hour for that. Now we're talking about certification, getting actually certified. So you've done the preparation, you've baselined your systems, you understand where they are, you've done this initial self walkthrough of the requirements. Now I have to start getting certified. You're going to want a gap assessment. There's different terms for gap assessment, but it's the assessment you do before the assessment, where you have a third party go through your SSP, go through your systems, talk to your people, and say, if I were assessing you today, this is how you would do. And then you have to remediate from that. All the findings that they have, you have to go fix those before the final assessment. That C3PAO, you may have one that does your gap and one that does your final. You may have one that does both. That's going to cost you between 35K to 100K and up, and it might take a month, it might take 6 months. It really depends on the availability of the C3PAO, and it depends on your readiness for them to be able to actually assess you. You're going to require somebody in your company who's dedicated to them during that assessment. That dedication may be 100%, it may be less, but it's probably 100% because the assessor is going to have questions, need access, and need help reviewing everything and finding everything. You're going to need people in the company to do the remediation. The gap assessment finds a bunch of things wrong. You have to fix them. You can hire that your RP, or you can have your full-time employees do that, but it's going to take time and money. And then finally, your sustainment. This is the thing that gets kind of left off of people's estimates a lot of times. What people have not been talking about enough, in my opinion, is that it's not just enough to achieve CMMC level 2 third-party certification, I'm ready to go in SPRS. You have to do it again in 3 years. But between now and 3 years from now, you've got 2 out years. You have to do a self-assessment in those out years and report it in SPRS 2. So CMMC becomes a continuous detection and mitigation activity. You are going to have a full-time employee who is constantly reviewing documentation, constantly updating processes, constantly doing scans and little mini assessments and tabletop exercises and so on. That's going to be for a small company. Maybe it's a quarter FTE. For a larger company, it's going to be a whole FTE or more, depending on how big your company is. So now let's do the math on this. If you're a small company and you're not very complex and you've been doing some good cybersecurity hygiene, you're still going to spend maybe 50K in labor costs to get ready for this. You're going to spend maybe 50K to get gap assessed and finally certified, and you're going to be spending probably 100K for the first year just to get there an employee, and you're going to be spending that in sustainment going on. So you might be looking at $200,000 to get there. Maybe it's less. For a complex company, and maybe not a good cybersecurity program, or you don't have one that's well aligned with this, your prep might be 200K in labor alone, but you might spend another 200K. Who knows, right? Because every company is different. You might have to upgrade systems. You might have to buy new network routers and new endpoints. You might have to change your service providers. You're going to spend on the certification as well, but that's going to be more because there's more to do. And so it's going to end up being not 50K, but more like 100. And then in your sustainment costs, you're going to be having a couple of people running through your systems constantly in your cybersecurity team, specifically to maintain your self-certification, your self-assessments, and prepare for your next final certification. So maybe that's $700,000 today, and you're going to spend, your headcount goes up by a couple, and you're spending another $200,000 plus. So the costs here are not trivial for a small company. There's a lot of doom and gloom, by the way. I'm very sorry. So here's some paths and problems. So where do you get started? When do you get started? Well, you get started, hopefully last time we talked, last time we met, you hopefully got started. But if you haven't started yet, it's like the old saying, when's the best time to plant a tree? Best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago, but the second best time is right now. Think of it like that. Start today. You're going to have these kinds of lead times, a year and a half, if you're just getting started from ground zero. But new contracts are starting to come out sometime this year, so the heat is on. There's criticism coming from the defense industrial base, coming from you, back to the defense and to the federal government saying this is an undue burden. It's being heard, but so far I haven't seen anything really done about it. But it's being heard. Don't stop complaining. If you don't have a team, you got to get help, and you have to be diligent, because there's a lot of people right now trying to take your money. And if you just give your money to the first person you meet, odds are you're going to be giving money again to somebody else who fixes their problems. Take your time with your due diligence. Scoping, gap assessment, and self-assessments are things that you have to do so that you're ready. Your C3PAO, by the way, and your registered professionals are all coming out of the CMMC AB marketplace. And I've got a link here. The Cybersecurity Maturity Model Certification Accreditation Body. The CMMC AB is cyberab.org. This is the only place where you can be accredited to do this work. And I'm going to show you a piece about them here in just a moment. But here's my quick roadmap for you. You've got to assess your contracts. If you're in business where you don't have these requirements, then thanks for spending time with me, and I hope you enjoyed it. But if you do, keep going. You have to do a survey and understand your data flow and your scoping for CUI. Check out what you're doing with respect to 800-171-R2, and then you've got to build your approach. Make a game plan, make a campaign out of this. Hire a consultant to build that approach for you, if nothing else, and then make decisions. Am I going to keep my information processing systems in-house? Are they going to be on managed services? Am I hybrid? Am I scoping my CUI for my entire enterprise? Or am I going to do an enclave where I partition it off only in one small space? You have to make those kind of decisions. You'll do your self-assessment and recover from it, your gap assessment and recover from it. You'll get your C3PAO assessment, and that will generate your certification to SPRS via EMAS, and now you do lots of business. That's what we're here for. Some resources for you, and then I'll wrap up. First, the Cyber AB and CMMC roles. When you're dealing with professionals in this domain, you should be hearing these kinds of words. A registered practitioner, this is an RP. This is somebody who's a consultant who has taken specific Cyber AB training and passed specific tests. It's not a really hard thing to do. It takes a couple of days and a few $100, but you can't just walk into it without knowledge. This is something that if you're educated in the domain, you can do easily. And it's just a rudimentary sort of checkbox to say, yes, this person has minimum knowledge and has done the right things. An RPO is a company, a consulting company that hires RPs. A CCP is somebody who is leveled up. It's like RP plus a bunch. And they are the kind of person who's able to provide specific guidance to you. A CCA will be hired by a C3PAO to perform assessments, and a C3PAO is a company that you contract with to do assessments. So these things are all defined at cyberab.org, where the marketplace is, where all of these certified professionals and companies are registered there. Look on there, see if you find somebody in your neighborhood, and that would be a good place to start. Some free resources that are provided by NSA, DoD, and NIST. These don't solve your CMMC problems, but by using some of these no-cost government-provided solutions for defense contracting, you can check some of the boxes in your SSP for things like continuous monitoring and things like that. So if you go through here, you can find solutions to close your gaps faster at no added cost to you. This is it's a haphazard response, but the government is trying to respond by the complaint about cost by providing certain things. It's coming from different organizations. It's not really well coordinated, but there are things you can do to lower your cost for compliance. You have to be aware of vendors pushing the urgency. While it is urgent, if somebody contacts you and says, your business is going to fail on Monday if you don't pay me money today to get you started on CMMC, push back on that. Don't follow the urgency. There's a shopping guide for C3PAOs on this website URL here. That's a place to start to kind of think about how you're going to do things. You got to get 3 quotes. You got to talk to different people and get an understanding of what right might look like for you. You can't just hand people money. Lots of resources at the CMMC Information Institute. And I also recommend the CMMC Center of Awesomeness. There's a lot of swear words on their websites. You've been warned, but they're really important. And lastly, FloridaMakes is a key partner for you because they're creating webinars like this to help everybody synchronize and orient on the problem. Last words for you, don't wait. Get started. If you haven't gotten started, get started today. You got to practice good cybersecurity hygiene regardless of what you're doing. Even if you don't have a CMMC requirement, you still have a requirement to protect your intellectual property data, your customers' data, and your personnel's data. You got to understand your contracts. If you don't understand your contracts, you're already at risk as a contractor in the government. And if you don't have a good conversation and a good relationship with your primes, your subs, your suppliers, and your vendors, and your customers, you should work on that. That's a really, really important thing to do. So that way you understand what they're trying to do with respect to cybersecurity and CMMC. Your skills on your company are really important. Cybersecurity is an enabler of your business success. It's not an added cost. It's an enabler of your business success. And that starts with skills in-house. Scoping is super important. Gap assessments, essential. Join mailing lists and forums. Stay informed. And when you build a plan, then go execute that plan and be ready to win new work in a highly competitive and increasingly highly regulated domain. That's all I have to offer for you today. Remember, Cyber Florida is a statewide resource across the state, public and private sectors, and contact for Cyber Florida is Brian Langley here, and I will stand by for questions and comments.
Thank you, Andy. Great information. I know it can be a little overwhelming, and certainly to Andy's point in the first seminar or the first workshop, kind of scary at times, but so important to protect yourself. We are seeing a rise in breaches and things of that nature. And it's the simple things sometimes. It's does our team members do our team members understand not to click on those links in their emails or just some of these little things. I'm also seeing just on a high level that some of the newer contracts are having a minimum SPURS score in relation to that contract. The number I'm seeing at the moment is a 90. So just FYI, these things are happening around you, and you may be seeing some of that as well. Let's get to our questions. I just wanted to give you that little tidbit. Let's get to our questions. Great comments and questions, by the way. If you still have questions, put them in the chat. I am still monitoring that as we go. A little housekeeping, we will send the slides and things out to everyone who was registered so that you have this information. Andy very specifically puts all of this great information in detail on these slides so that you can use it as a resource. So please look for that as we get that ready and out there. A couple of the questions, Andy. One was about cybersecurity as it relates to our manufacturing machines, the CNC machines that are out on the floor and things like that. Do you have anything you can add to that on execution of keeping those secure?
I want to caveat my answer by saying that I'm not a manufacturing person by background in the trade, but from a cybersecurity perspective, if I was an assessor and I was coming to your firm to assess your practices for CMMC, the 110 controls across the families, I would look at that CNC system with respect to the controls. Yep. Is there physical access? Is there physical access control? Is there digital access control? Is the system accessible from a network? If it is it logging access? And all of those sorts of things a CNC system, I'm going to presume, is a computer system attached to a physical system. So it becomes a cyber physical system, and it still has to meet all these requirements. I'm a little bit, admittedly, talking around the question because of my limited knowledge of a CNC equipment, but it still has to be compliant. And if the system itself doesn't support, like the example I gave of, if the system doesn't require you to log in, but it's still connected to the network, how can you be compliant with that? Well, there's ways to do that. And it's in your network architecture at that point. Let's say I had to deal with that sort of environment. I've got a network architecture where I've got systems that I log into and I do my regular office automation and work, but then connected to the network is a CNC system that only accepts a file for upload to, with instructions to execute, but there's no authentication. I can't certify that because it's not logging the access and it's not controlling the access. But what I can do is I can put it behind a firewall. I can put it behind what we call a bastion host, which would be a isolated system that has one connection to the CNC, one connection to a limited number of hosts on the network. And I would require authentication at the bastion host and logging at the bastion host, and then logging access, and then that would gatekeep the unauthenticated access. Something like that in the architecture, where then I could say to an assessor, this system does not have the inherent capability to be compliant with these controls. So as a mitigation for that, I built a boundary around it that is compliant with the controls, and we've tested it, and here's how that testing has shown that we've achieved our goal. That would probably be my approach for that.
Thank you, Andy. I know that's an interesting question with the technology that we live with today and how the CNC machines are networked and accessed and all of that. What a good question. And of course, that I believe what will happen as we continue to evolve there is that answer may change as other opportunities come about to protect those CNC machines from network invasion and things. So great questions. We spoke about flow down compliance. Andy spoke about that already. Let's talk a moment about government regulations and such around IP information and who determines what is CUI. So the question, I'm going to read the question so I don't mess it up in any way. The question was, are there any government regulations or documents that specifically define what manufacturers or contractors' owned IP proprietary information is CUI, or is this really up to the individual manufacturer to determine for themselves?
That's like such an unanswerable question. but I've never let that stop me.
I appreciate that about you.
I've never let that stop me. So there's a whole lot of it depends in my answer. A whole lot of detail that we need to add into that to even get close to it. But if you go back to NARA and you look at their descriptions and definitions, everything you just described is CUI. But if you go back to the Defense Department and you look at 5200.48 and you kind of explore on that angle, you get this sense that CUI is government generated. Even in NIST documents talk about it as CUI is unclassified data. By the way, as an aside, you don't have a classified data spill with unclassified data. So if you have an exfiltration of CUI, it's a reportable activity, but it's not a data spill in a classified sense. If you've worked in classified environments and you're like, oh, I just emailed myself this top secret file and I sent it to my Google account, that's a spill. You don't have a spill with CUI because it's not classified. But the government has this tone to their descriptions of it's CUI because we, the government, we said it is. It's inherently risky to us to allow you, the contractor, to store this on your contractor-owned systems. Thinking like, why does China have a joint strike fighter looking airplane? because the contractors building the Joint Strike Fighter had all that CUI data on contractor-owned systems that were breached by Chinese nation-state actors. That kind of thing's what we're talking about. That's not the company's IP, that's the government's requirements that then become implemented in the company's IP. And there's where we get messy, right? You know, you got to pick all that apart. It all really, and I hate, you know, restating it, but I really feel like, what does your contracting officer say about it? And if your contracting officer doesn't know, which is the thing I've heard the most, my core and my COTAR and my CO, they don't know what this is yet. That's because they're going through their education programs. I bet Defense Acquisition University, I haven't looked. Now I'm going to look now that I'm saying it. I bet DAU is full of class offerings about this, and there's a pipeline of people trying to get into those classes. So the answer to the question, I've wandered around not offering an answer yet. I think that if it's your IP, well, that's really super important to your business. That's kind of how you stay in business and gives you your competitive edge. I would treat it as CUI, even if the government doesn't say it is, because it's a crown jewel. It is a thing that keeps you in business, and it should be treated with the utmost of security.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I kind of look at it as if it's something that gives you a competitive edge, or if it's something that you really pride yourself on having over and above your competition, or things of that nature, then it deserves to be protected in some way. So so great answer, even a non-answer, right, Andy? Next question we have is around an air-gapped system, and I apologize, I don't know much about this one. An air-gapped system and how that works with CMMC.
So an air-gapped system is going to be where I have a standalone computer, a computational system of some kind that's not connected to the network. So if I have, and I'm going to talk like I know about manufacturing, and I'm going to get it wrong, and everybody's welcome to laugh at me with this, but I'm picturing I've got, say, a CNC machine that's going to create a physical something. It has a computer controller. It has a head on it that's computational, but it's not connected to the network. Well, how do I issue it its instructions to do its work? Well, I download it from my actual network on a thumb drive. Maybe I'm old school and I use floppy disks. That'll keep the burglars from stealing my IP, right? Because they won't be able to read them. Whatever it is I use, I download it and then I air gap it to that system and then upload it. So my answer to the question is, it's part of the storytelling. So it's still in scope. If that's CUI data, if that's technical, if that's protected technical data in the defense category for CUI, and the government agrees that it is, you're moving it along, but now you don't necessarily have the same network controls. And it's going to depend then on your assessor. Like there's a requirement for monitoring and logging of things. Is your assessor going to say it's a standalone system, so there's no requirement to log it? Because if you were logging access and activities in that system, you'd have to have it connected to the network, which defeats the purpose of it being air gapped and lowers the security by meeting the control. Well, that's the wrong direction to go. And if that's what your assessor is going to require, then I don't know, find another assessor. Maybe. But on the other hand, can you still meet the spirit of the law, of the rule, even though you can't necessarily meet all the things? It may come down to, for that specific control that can't be met, you state in your SSP, this control can't be met. We can't get system logs that document accesses to this system because it's not on the network, because it's more secure when it's not on the network. But we mitigate the lack of that meeting that control with a supplemental control of the physical access, where we have that air gap system in a controlled room, and the access to it has a proxy card beep and we log that. Something like that that allows
Fair.
you to continue meeting the spirit of it without the letter of it.
Fair enough. Thank you, Andy, for the clarification, certainly. And I know we're going to run into more and more things like that as people become, CMMC compliant. Another question about CUI. If one of our manufacturers receives a contract opportunity with CUI stated, but nothing's labeled on the drawings or the things that are part of that package, if you will, how are we to treat that?
Well, you got to get a different contract officer then. You just go ask for, is there somebody else I can talk to? Of course, that's not going to work. But there's two pieces to that question. One is I have a contract that requires CMMC certification, and then two is the information that I'm getting from the customer is we suspect is CUI based on its content, but it's not marked. So those two things. The first one kind of is the mitigation for the second one. You're already operating as a CMMC, a certified environment where all the protections and controls are in place. So it kind of doesn't matter if it's marked or not because you're protecting it anyway, provided that it's following your CUI data flow. In that initial scoping, you're like, how do I get it? How do I process it? How do I store it? How do I destroy it? How do I transmit it? So long as I'm getting unmarked CUI in that data flow, you're protecting it. And that's the important part. And then it's just a housekeeping problem. But if it comes to you outside of that data flow, now you're not protecting it according to those protections. And the question is that my fault or not? Like, am I liable for a contract, like a breach of contract? Am I in breach of contract by not protecting it that way? And I think the answer is no, I'm not in breach of contract because I defined this I defined my scope and I have agreements with my suppliers, whoever sends me things, that this is how they do it. And if they send me the wrong thing the wrong way, it's not classified. So I'm not reporting it as a classified breach or a leak. It's merely sensitive. I would delete it and I would contact the sender and say, this is sent inappropriately. Please correct that. Even if it's being sent correctly, I would still, every time I got it, I would reply to the sender and say, could you please give me verification? My company, and maybe you can be kind of lofty and snooty about it and say, my company's livelihood depends on compliance with CMMC. And according to DODI 5200.48, this document, this data you've sent me is inappropriately marked, and I can't process it until it's done correctly. And then they will be like, you guys are such jerks, but okay. And then they'll do it right.
No, that's perfect. Thank you, Andy. As we transition things back over to Ruth so that she can wrap us up, I do have one more question in the chat that I do want to mention as we are, getting the slides handled and things like that. The question, Andy, was, with a specific drawing that is received from a customer and it is marked CUI, I'm assuming, and this is Jolie assuming, but in my world, all of the programming code, things that are used to manufacture that part would also then by default be CUI. Is that accurate?
I would say that's probably a safe assessment.
Yeah.
Because now, not knowing anything about G code as a specific thing, I would suspect that I could reverse that generation. I could take G code and create the drawing from it or understand it better. And that would be, there's a derivative aspect of it there.
Agreed.
A more insidious thing that is kind of a doom and gloom thing to say. So I work a lot of bid and proposal, usually for services type contracts for defense. Every now and then an RFP comes out marked CUI. And now you've taken your entire proposal process, including your bid itself, and moved it into your CUI processing scope. And that stinks.
Yep. Very cumbersome for sure.
Very.
Thank you, Andy, for all of the answers to the questions. I don't believe I missed anything, but I will go back through. And if I did, I will get with Andy and Ruth separately, and we will include an email out to everyone with those slides to answer anything. So
Okay.
with that, I will send it back over to you, Ruth.
Oh, thank you, Jolie. Andy, great job. Thank you really so much for modifying, adjusting, augmenting your presentation from the first one.
Yep.
We got from the webinar number 1. And so I feel comfortable that we were able to give you the key takeaways that we promised at the beginning, the key concepts with Andy, and we resumed the learning.
Oh, Ruth, you're cutting out there. Well, that answered that.
Jolie, can you hear me?
I can hear you now. Do you want me to read off the key takeaways? Oh,
Yeah, I'm gonna take off my video. Go finish the key takeaway, and then I do have an announcement, and I think Brian may want to say something. Go ahead and finish the takeaways.
yep. So our key takeaways today, Andy really went deeper in that review of CMMC level 1, level 2, and how that's all working together, and why we don't need to worry about right now, maybe CMMC level 3, unless you fall into that unique niche that requires that. We discussed the additional the learning regarding the roadmap and starting a security practice. I would wholeheartedly say today's a new day, right? If for whatever reason you have not started your cybersecurity journey up to this point, you're starting today, right? It's just a matter of draw the line in the sand and make that determination to move forward. No one's going to, throw up their arms or throw you under the bus. Let's just make sure that we're getting things accomplished so that you can stay successful in the defense industrial base or Department of Defense or wherever it is that you are working. And we are all here to support that. Hopefully you're seeing that through the webinars, but people like Ruth and myself through FloridaMakes, and certainly with our collaborative community partners like Cyber Florida, that is why we are here. I just got goosebumps, right? That's why we're here. This was a great overview on the key steps for achieving CMMC and some of those nuances and the answering in those questions that came out from the audience, I think just helped hone in on some of the things that you all are focused on. And then, of course, we spoke very briefly about the no-cost resources provided through Cyber Florida. You will be seeing more information on that coming. We have some great things in the works from this collaborative partnership with FloridaMakes and Cyber Florida. So stay tuned. We will be emailing. You'll see notifications of that probably via LinkedIn and other places. So more to come on that. Those were the key takeaways. Ruth, back to you.
Thank you so much, Jolie. I think Brian wants to say something. Brian, did you want to take a few moments, and then I will wrap up and the comments.
No, I just want to compliment Andy's great comments and overview, and FloridaMakes, the partnership we have with you. And we just want to make sure that you know that we are a resource to you, and we have much more to come there. So thank you so much for your time this morning.
Thank you, Brian.
That's great. So I get the pleasure of, well, first of all, the next slide, please, Connor. So what we will do is I will, not that one. Oh yeah, that's the one. Anyway, so the next webinar is on tariffs. Everybody's head is spinning right now on tariffs. So we have a wonderful presentation for you. That is Tuesday, not Friday, Tuesday, April 22nd. So mark your calendars. The registration is already available in our website. And I want to take a moment to, next slide, please, Connor. Stay tuned. So our business advisors will get hold of all the Florida manufacturers in this webinar. So please take their calls so they can follow up with you. And we already said we're going to share the slide, and please send us your survey. But my comment on take the call from BAs is because, ta-da, next slide, Brian, I'm sorry, I'm stealing your thunder a little bit. Stay tuned, Brian. and us in FloridaMakes, we are putting the final touches on a joint program that will help our Florida manufacturers with their CMMC journey. Yes, yes, right, Brian? We're moving forward. So stay tuned. This is a wonderful collaboration, and we're going to be announcing that very shortly. So thank you very much. Stay in touch. Wonderful presentation. Thank you, Cyber Florida and Jolie, for this 1.5 hours. We met our goals, and everybody have a good Friday. See you on the 22nd. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.